Welcome to the fifth and final chapter of the Kraft Switcher video series. It's been a long series, but it's a big job to do, and it takes nearly 3 hours to do during an operating session. At the end of our last video, the eastbound boundary freight, Extra 8715 East, had just departed Castlegar. With that departure, the Kraft Switcher now has full access to the main again and can get back to work. We've switched out the big industries, Castlegar and the Pope and Talbot sawmill, and what remains are the smaller industries around Castlegar, the freight house, shown here, the team track, which is right beside it, the end loading ramp, and the two industries at South Castlegar, Canadian Propane and Mitchell Lumber. We start by pulling all the outbounds from the freight house and the team track. We couple them up to the two cars we've taken away from Pope and Talbot, and we're depositing them in the sub-ended track in the yard. Now let's retrieve those 4 boxcars that we reordered in the last video. We shuffled them so that there'd be 2 cars for the freight house, followed by 1 for the team track, that's the limit that we could spot at the team track, and then 1 off spot for the team track that will have to be switched tomorrow. We'll leave that off spot in the yard. Our next step is to swing around behind our caboose and the 2 remaining cars that we brought in this morning. We'll use them as a handle to grab that empty flat car that's at the end loading ramp. That's got to make its way back to Nelson. After pulling our train onto the main, we'll reverse direction onto the east leg of the Y and switch to the South Castlegar Industries. South Castlegar is switched from the other side of the swing gate. It's unscenic, so I'm not going to show the details of those operations in this video. I'm afraid you'll just have to trust me. We've exchanged a loaded for an empty bulkhead flat car at Mitchell Lumber and dropped the propane tank at Canada Propane. So we're turning through the southern leg of the Y with the 2 empty flats and our caboose, conveniently positioning ourselves on the rear of our returning train. We'll also grab those cars bound for Nelson that we deposited in the sub-end track in the yard. Now all our industry switching is done, we'll make up our train for departure on the passing siding. Then we'll go into the agent operator's office and look for our orders so that we can return as Extra 8717 East to Nelson. We have 17 cars for our returning train, 3 to drop at South Slocan and 14 to take to Nelson. The passing siding capacity at Castlegar is 21 cars. It's marked by those small red dots that you see at the end of the siding. If we hadn't been fortunate enough to have the eastbound take those cars to Nelson for us, we would be over capacity for our siding. In that situation where we're over capacity for the passing siding, it would probably be wise to back the whole train into the West Robson spur while we wait for our orders to return. That way at least the main is clear. If you look closely on the ground near the station between the passing siding and main, you can see the red pin that marks the clearance point. All passing sidings on the Columbia and Western are marked this way. While our crew waits near the station for its orders, number 89 is passing into the yard. 89 is the train of empty ore cars, which is returning those cars from Cominco to the Phoenix ore fields where they'll be loaded with chalcopyrite. The agent operator has dropped the westbound board for number 89. They'll need to go into the agent operator's office to get their clearance to enter the boundary, and also to be updated on whether they'll have pusher support today to get to the top of Farron. It's a light train today, so there will be no pusher support. 89 will make its way up the 1% grade from Castlegar to Shields, where the 2.2% climb to the summit begins. If necessary, they'll split their train there and double the hill to Farron. Because 89 is a scheduled train, if they do decide to split their train and double the hill, any opposing extras will have to hold at Farron and wait until they see the markers on the end of the caboose which signals that the train has been completed. Then they could proceed. Our conductors return from the yard office not only with our return orders, but also with our white flags, marking us as an extra. With our flags, our orders, and our clearance, we can now head off for our return trip to Nelson. We have one stop on the way home. We have those 3 empty wood chip hoppers to drop at South Slocan. These will be picked up tomorrow by the Slocan Way Freight and taken up to the Triangle Forest Products Mill in Slocan City. We also have a box car that we need to lift from the team track here. With our work done and our train reassembled, we're on our way home. All trains have to hold at yard limits before entering Nelson Yard. We'll drop down and phone the yard master to get permission to enter. When Nelson gets busy, sometimes we can be waiting here for a while. The yard master has given us permission to enter, so we'll enter and terminate our train on yard track 2. As our crew ties up and our locals are hostled over to the diesel house, let's reflect on a few learning points from this series. Number 1 important point: Castlegar is a busy junction. Make sure you do your best to leave the main line clear as much as possible, as well as the through track on the south leg of the Y, so that the ore freights heading into and leaving the Rossland subdivision from the Boundy subdivision can make their way through. Second most important point: You'll have a lot of cars to set out and to pick up. Don't try and pull all the cars first and then make your setouts. Work the industries in chunks, probably 3 or 4 chunks for Castlegar, followed by Pope and Talbot, and then the remaining of Castlegar. Next learning point. Use the eastbound and westbound freights to make your life easier. As long as they're not already at capacity, they should be able to take some of your cars on for you. The most important ones to have ready are the empty wood chip hoppers for number 81, which is scheduled through at around 9:30. So make sure you work that chunk of Castlegar first. And the final learning point is to use the passing siding to build your return train, and build it as you go. Remember, you're in yard limits and you're the yard master, so you can control how trains enter and pass through Castlegar. Well, that brings us to the end. I hope you've enjoyed this video series, and should you take on the Kraft Switcher job on the Columbian Western, I hope the advice has been helpful. Thanks for watching.